Do you think that politics is realistically a vehicle that you can make real impact and change in society through?
Yes.
And why?
So, I mean, I can point you to some of the things which most people don't know that I've been involved in because cannabis is sexy, so I get to talk about weed all the time.
That's good.
But I...
Light it up, boys.
But
we'll put the interview on pause and
yeah,
we'll come back.
where are all the graphics?
Be
I'm
like the
so
next level
used
sexy.
I'm so used to being interviewed behind this backdrop of like cannabis leaves.
That one time Chloe got high and did an interview.
But in 2019, or it might have been the start of 2020, I passed the first ever Green Party members bill that had consensus support from every single political party in Parliament at every single stage. And that was a bill which in the last budget had $4 million attributed to it to provide for people with disabilities who might want to run for Parliament to run barrier-free. So if you need a sign language interpreter, you'll get a sign language interpreter. If you need Braille, you'll get that. And all of that makes democracy more accessible and in turn more representative. So that's just like one tiny little piece of how you can change things in there. But I think, to get a real sense of understanding of where I come from in terms of how I approach politics, I think of it in two broad kind of spheres or spaces. So there's the stuff that we always talk about, which is legislation, so laws, regulation, bylaws, council's involvement, funding, subsidies, taxation, incentives, contracts, procurement, treaties, all that stuff. That's the structure, that's the blueprint, that's the coat hooks. Yeah. What I don't think we talk about anywhere near enough is culture. So culture from a typical understanding is synonymous with religious practice or someone's ethnic or geographical background. But culture from a design thinking perspective or a systems level perspective is a shared set of values. Yeah. So when you think about culture in that way, you start to understand how you can have hugely diverse groups of people who come together to form communities or society because they have shared value systems. All of that underpins the legitimacy of the structures or the systems that we almost end up taking for granted. So different touch points for cultural change are things like media, including social media, so dissemination of information and ideas and conversation. They are things like education, which takes time, but we also know how meaningful it is. That's why we're currently engaged in a dialogue about instituting New Zealand history in schools. Yeah. But it's also things like community building, which includes collective action or petitions or protest or advocacy or activism. And all of that stuff is where I think that far too few politicians have been willing to demonstrate the leadership that they have in both of those worlds. So sure, I'm one vote of 120 inside of Parliament, but in order to try and get 61 votes, which is the majority that you need to pass any change, I need to light a fire under the butts of all of those other politicians to have them feel as though they will lose their jobs because the whole of society, our cultural values have shifted and changed, and they are not going to be able to maintain their power or their place in there unless they do this action which is, demonstrative of where our values are at.